Welcome to Seeds of Hope, regenerating souls and communities. I'm your host, Elena Garitas, and this is episode number 2. On this podcast, join me on a journey across the regenerative agriculture ecosystem through conversations with farmers, founders, investors, and change makers as we learn how to create healthier soils, communities, and food. Today, I'm excited to have Timothée Murillo joining us. Hi, Timothy.
Hi, Elena. Very pleased to have this conversation with you.
Me too. We met earlier this month at the Regenerative Agriculture Summit in Amsterdam. And so I'm really excited to bring our conversation to the podcast. Timothy is the Senior Director of Smart and Sustainable Farming at McCain Foods, which is a global food company most well known for their French fries, if I'm right.
That's right.
And before this, he was the senior manager for the Danone Impact Fund for 6 years and previously spent 8 years in finance, sustainability and business development roles at Veolia. But beyond these titles and accomplishments, what really stood out to me when talking to you, Timothy, in our previous conversations, is that it's not just what you do in your work with your teams, but how you do it with boots on the ground, listening to stakeholders, leading with integrity, and rethinking what new approaches are needed to work successfully in sustainability. And I'm really looking forward to dive into some of this in our conversation today. So welcome.
Thank you. No, I agree. It's very interesting to take the time to discuss how we do business regeneratively and not just the results or the learnings we're getting, but the effort, the values, the principles that we try to preserve. And it's interesting to discuss this with you as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So before we dive in, I had an interesting thought, and I would like to ask you, so you've worked in agriculture, water, sustainability. If you could have any superpower related to your work, what would it be? For example, would you control the weather, talk to plants, turn anything into compost instantly? What would be your superpower?
That's interesting. Of course, weather when it comes to agriculture is often something probably people would want to control, but I like the idea of being humble in front of nature and accepting the weather we're given and doing the best to protect nature. I would rather say maybe change the rules and force any committee, any board to have farmers in them or members from the local community as sort of a mandatory requirement, as a person who would seat and have their voice and be listened to when it comes to building value chains, regenerating territories, and transforming the ways businesses operate in connection with farmers. I think they should be the first ones to be involved. So this would be a nice superpower to have.
All right. Wow. You really took us deep there, right into governance and what might need to happen on the structural level and really diversifying the voices around the table. I think that this is actually a really great segue for you to take us back to the beginning of your career and learn a little bit more about what initially drew you to the work of sustainability.
Absolutely. So I started my career roughly 20 years ago. At the time, sustainability as a career did not exist. It was more of a utopia and the best case scenario, and it was sort of background noise for many people, but nothing serious to listen to. And it was an interesting situation to be in early on because it really forced me to be confident with my choices and my values very early in my career. So it's been an interesting journey, starting from listening, observing, understanding the challenges that businesses face, but also communities, territories, the organizations, the stakeholders, generally speaking, that any company works with, and try and identify what are the main obstacles, the roadblocks, and where are there solutions that could exist that have not been tested yet. I never gave myself any other option than to pursue that ambition. It was tough at times. It's very likely that I could have gone for a maybe more lucrative or more gratifying career or successful, depending under what lens you look at it. But I felt like business was such a powerful tool that if combined or driven with ambitions to generate impact, it really had a power that is almost unlimited in terms of scalability and speed and results it can bring. And I started my career in the water sector because I saw water at the intersection of so many crucial issues for our world: agriculture, food access, dignity, education, personal hygiene, hydration, women's rights, because women are very often the ones looking after water and having the responsibility for water in many of the Southern Hemisphere countries. And so it was a lot of learnings, developing social businesses for water access, building private-public partnerships to ensure water and sanitation. And through these experiences, I really gained a better understanding of the mindset and the key success factors when it comes to conducting business sustainably. And it's been a journey that keeps going on, but it has allowed me to develop more than just technical skills, try and understand what are the know-hows, the inner values, the deep principles that sustainability leaders have that do help make a difference in the way we do business.
Yeah, absolutely. So was there an aha moment? Was there something that you had experienced maybe in your personal life that led you to, okay, I want to work with water, I want to tackle this simple thing, H2O, that touches all the facets of human life, like you just explained?
There were many aha moments. I would say that early on in my career, I was just carried by the fact that sustainability is about long term. It's about thinking long term and the impact that decisions and actions have over time. And naturally, I did think long term when doing business too. And that means in a conventional scenario where business is conducted on a transactional, nearsighted basis, to think long term, and not just long term, but more holistically in terms of looking to understand what are the levers, what are the risks, what are the opportunities that are untapped, what are the implications of this transaction more generally, and trying to understand what are the strengths, the complementarities in this transaction that are at play. That quickly led me to move away from transactions to really trying to build partnerships where value does not just move from one pocket to another, but is created together. And I remember that early on, particularly when speaking with financial institutions, banks that have the capital and the capacity to decide where to allocate that capital, it was surprising and shocking to many bankers to see me come and discuss partnership opportunities in a world where we compete, where we fight for our piece of the cake. The idea of joining forces was looked at very surprisingly, to say the least. But then realizing that instead of fighting for a small piece of the cake each, we can simply join forces and make the cake so big that we would each have a bigger piece of it, and the communities, and the territories, and the whole stakeholders. It just made sense. And there were cases after cases and investment proposals and initiatives that proved and developed a way of working that was initially just alternative, but became much more mainstream over time. And we realized, well, the value is multiplied when we join forces, and the payback, the return on investment, even from a very financial angle, is increased. And so that has helped make the case and show many institutions that conventional business actually has a higher risk profile than regenerative business. I would actually invite stakeholders to look at the risk of keeping things the way they are and hoping for a different result.
I've heard this a lot also this week here at Climate Week. What is the risk of not doing anything? Do you have an example that you could share about how you went into a partnership or a transaction where your partners were thinking traditional business skill sets, approaches, and then turned it into what is the new approach? How do you form this partnership that grows the pie?
Yeah, I'll try and share an example. To me, sustainability very often arises from paradoxical situation to begin with. I remember just being curious and having my ears open around the business and trying to be anchored in the business. I was working for a company, and in the food sector, many companies depend on natural ingredients to be produced by farmers. And so in these large companies, you have procurement departments, buyers who buy those ingredients. Historically, the intent is to buy for the best price and get the most quantity you can get, right? So I was just sitting next to the coffee machine and speaking with one of those buyers who had a big responsibility across the key fruits that was important for a preparation. And he was just telling me randomly, we're all the industries sourcing from that same micro village in Mexico, where the soil is saturated, the yields are declining. There's not even visibility on whether or not I'm going to get the volumes I need. I cannot commit. Every year I end up needing to buy on the spot market at the last minute from the other side of the world to get the volumes I need. I explode my budget. I cannot have visibility over how much I'm going to spend and actually deliver. And I don't know how to secure my position in this market. And after discussing and meeting with other leaders, we realized there's no need in keeping doing the same. But we could rather think, if that very small village is saturated, why don't we see this as an opportunity to develop an entirely new value chain and transition farmers in a new ecosystem and territory where we can lift up farmers from poverty, restore ecosystems, train farmers to produce that fruit and ingredient sustainably and regeneratively, and create a transparent value chain for that company from day one. All of this at a cost that is more competitive, more predictable, and more reliable and consistent than relying on the traditional business as usual. That example has actually been not only just successful, but also identified and scaled across different geographies, because it proved a material case that sustainability in value chains and agriculture has a financial case that makes companies more competitive from a cost perspective. But also, when you think about the food product you put on the market, it helps tell a story to consumers. It helps tell people, where does the food that they eat come from? What is the role of farmers and territories in that? How is it produced? So when you look at this from farm all the way to fork, sustainability can be a driver that unleashes the value creation across the entire chain for all stakeholders involved, from small farmers who are supported and can find access to decent employment and better livelihoods, to the communities that live with them and the territories that support them, all the way to consumers who get better products and more transparent ones.
I love that this came from you standing at the coffee break room and listening to the problems that your colleague was going through. And earlier you mentioned your superpower, wanting to bring farmers, bring those other voices to the boardrooms, to the tables. What kind of work did you do with the farmers on the ground in this process? Because I assume they're a key component to making this happen.
So I will say two things. The first one is the coffee machine thing. It's not a random coincidence. I do have very busy days and not so much time to stand by the coffee machine. But I do make sure to anchor myself in the business as much as possible and not bring sustainability as a nice add-on to business conducted the same way over and again. For sustainability to succeed, it needs to be deeply rooted in the DNA of a company and transpire across all of its value chain, manufacturing, supply, procurement, marketing, sales, finance. And that is why it really requires to understand the challenges of the leaders across these functions, to bring responses to them that will meet their priorities, but also bring on sustainability as a central part of how a company operates. If it's disconnected from the business, there's no chance it's going to stick. It's just going to be a one-time, nice, fun operation. We're going to do very useful things, but they're not going to scale. So that's the first part of the answer. The other one is about farmers and communities. when it's about creating a project from scratch or reinventing a model that exists, starting by getting the feedback from farmers and from the community in general is essential. They are the ones who know best what is good, what they need, and what they can do or not do. They are the ones who can have the power to make something possible. So if you're going to produce chocolate and you don't meet with the cocoa producers who produce it at the first step, there's likely to be a challenge at somewhere down the road. But if you co-create an initiative, an investment model, a value chain with the very stakeholders who are acting and living this project and whose livelihoods depend on that model, then you can be guaranteed that if there is stake for them, they're going to be engaged, invested from day one, and it will be a true partnership for a common win. We have to remember that for large food companies, but many other sectors are the same, the success of these companies depend on the success of the farmers who supply them. So it's not us against, it's us with. Because if companies are not able to secure the natural ingredients they need, not just the farmers will disappear and have very challenging situations, but these companies themselves. So when companies look at the business case of sustainability, they also look at it from a very pragmatic angle of how can I sustain my very own model over the long term. That's exactly what we went through with McCain Foods. We realized as a food company founded in an agriculture rural area, working directly with over 3,500 potato farmers around the world, we need to make a commitment and support our farmers who face rising temperatures, declining yields, increasing cost of inputs, volatility, unprecedented geopolitical variability. And by making this commitment to regenerative agriculture, restoring soil health, increasing the resilience, the competitiveness of farmers, then we are securing, of course, farming communities, but even our own business and our capacity to offer delicious French fries to our consumers.
This is what I heard you speak about at the Agriculture Summit together with Rabobank, your initiative that you've developed together as partners to grow the pie. And I really was blown away by how creative it was and how, as you just mentioned, it makes business sense as well as environmental and social sense. So can you share a little bit about how this program is set up?
Absolutely. And you use the word creative, and I will elaborate on this a little bit. Sustainability requires creativity because for one to reconcile commercial imperatives of the short term with the long-term sustainability ambitions that an organization may have, this requires quite some innovation and creative solutions to bridge the gap. Taking a commitment over the long term while still keeping the engine fueling and self-sustained in the short term is a challenge. So that was the starting point, one of them at least. And then recognizing the challenges that our partnering growers were confronted with when it comes to adopting new farming practices, investing in new equipment, solutions, smart and precision agriculture, for example, sustainable use of water, optimizing their irrigation systems, the use of fertilizer, reducing the toxicity of the inputs that are used. All of these are challenges that require alternatives and that have a cost, let's be honest, but they also have a reward. So it started by speaking with our partnering growers and understanding what are the costs and the benefits at farm level and at scale of the transition to regenerative practices. And we were able to identify sort of the size of the prize, if you will. And we looked at it and said, as a company, it's our responsibility to commit and support our partnering farmers. So we're going to commit and put some skin in the game big time. We're going to provide technical advisory and training for growers to have the knowledge to adopt new practices. We're going to transition our contracts to multi-year to give visibility to farmers and stakeholders over the revenues and the activity that they generate. We're going to provide a premium per ton of regeneratively grown potatoes as part of our contracts with farmers. So we put ourselves again in the shoes of farmers and thought, what are the main providers of services and inputs and products to these farmers? And are there some of those who are committed and who have an interest in regenerative agriculture and sustainability? And when it comes to financing, we looked at the banks that serve our farmers. In the Netherlands, it was pretty straightforward. Over 85% of farmers, including potato farmers, are customers of one bank, and that's Rabobank. It's the leading agricultural bank for food transition. And it happens that Rabobank, more than just a market share, has significant expertise and commitment when it comes to the agricultural transition. We reached out to that bank and said, we work with the same partners. They are your clients, they are our suppliers, and together we all depend on each other. How can we join forces? How can we evaluate the risk, the return, and find an innovative formula to support growers who want to invest in new equipment, new machinery, new decision systems, but need access to capital to do that in a way that really reduces the risk on them and maximizes the chances of success. And we were able to move from a standpoint of debt collateral to potential and promise, and basically look at not just what if we default, but rather what if we don't do anything, and what's the cost of inaction, and what if we try, and here's the challenge that we have, and here's how we're going to monitor results, evaluate KPIs, indicators, agree on the language that we speak and under what lens we evaluate these eligible investments and farmers, and make it possible for committed growers to invest at preferred conditions and terms and in ways that are really ensuring not just the livelihoods of farmers, but also the future of our food system. Because clearly, if farming becomes a less attractive profession, we all wonder, what are we going to eat in 10 years from now?
I think the last point you said really hits home for me. I think we see so much that the climate tech space has been so successful with solar, transportation, electric vehicles really taking off on a commercial scale. And I always wondered, well, we can't eat batteries, we can't eat cars. So what is that piece? You know, how do we connect our very real human needs of nutrition, of farming, of connecting with the land in that way? So that's what originally attracted me to regenerative agriculture. Important, incredibly important piece of our world. And I also love what you said earlier about moving from collateral to investment potentials. It almost seems like, even though it's still a loan, some of the mindset might be more of an investment mindset.
Instead of looking at past credentials only, trying to look at what is the potential of these new practices. And if we measure and we agree that there's a list of practices and criteria that can be tracked and guarantee adoption of certain practices, there can be a reward for that and an access to capital that can be preferred. We also have gone as far as to try and de-risk the journey for our growers under multiple angles. One is, of course, providing them with technical and agronomy knowledge so that there's higher chances of adopting these practices successfully. The other one is on a more psychological basis. It's about change. And like any change process, stop doing things the way you've done for generations and trying to approach things a new way. It requires trust. It requires mutual understanding. It requires partnership that really goes through ups and downs. We at McCain have been privileged to work with farmers sometimes for 2, sometimes 3 generations in a row. There's a relationship, a direct relationship of working with them over time, building this trust. And they have also happened to have the same bank and the same partners for a long time. So when all these players come and speak the same language with the same standards and indicators and support the same journey, it makes more sense, it's less risky, and it's more attractive for a farmer to try and advance in this journey.
Yeah. And you talk about those relationships, you talk about collaboration over competition and also multi-generational relationships. And we've previously talked about, okay, thinking 7 generations ahead, which is an indigenous way of making decisions. How do you think about this in your business and the broader sustainability movement?
Well, this is more of a personal inner belief, but I do think that we are all in the same journey. We're all sharing the same planet and the same resources. We're all experiencing the same situation, but nonetheless, it's quite a fractured world, and we're not all given the same opportunities, and it makes it very natural to have a responsibility towards each other, really. You refer to that very wise and beautiful principle of native indigenous communities in Canada, thinking 7 generations ahead and thinking about the impact of their decisions in 7 generations. There's another principle I think I've shared with you from more my Mexican roots, which is from the Mayan language, in Lakesh, in Laken. And it means I am you, you are me, we are each other, and we're all one, really. So that's very much a fundamental driver for me to do business and think, why and how can we do business in a way that we bring value, we create impact that is financial, social, environmental, that lasts and that can scale significantly. And with those principles, I think it helps engage or find common ground between people. Ultimately, we're all individuals, organizations, and if we're able to try and understand what each other is looking after, what do they need or want, and how can there be some form of overlap in a way that we could work together and join forces, suddenly it unleashes strength and opportunities that did not exist when we worked in silos. There's always this discretionary piece in any person, employee, team member that will explain the difference between doing your job from 9 to 5 and doing your job with a fundamental sense of purpose, passion, belief, creativity, commitment, because it's just more than a job. It's very meaningful. And when we find that ingredient in people, and we're all unique, but finding that reveals really some potential and brings those creative solutions that we need, brings that innovation, these new talents, new skills, new ideas to address challenges that require different solutions.
And I think there's so much we can learn from those ancestral sayings that really underpin the way of relating, the way of being. Can you say that one more time? I asked you this before.
In Laken.
In Lakesh, in Laken. Such a beautiful saying in greeting.
It is a greeting, actually, so it says how profound this is. Yeah.
Right. The everyday, imagine if every day we said, hello, how are you? Without even thinking about it, we would say, yeah. I am you and you are me.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would really potentially really radically shift the way that we approach our conversations every day. You're right. And the way we do business.
I've actually read recently a very good book by Adam Grant, Give and Take. And I think I recommend it very much. And it explains the principles of givers versus takers, and how people who give their time, their ideas, their resources, their intelligence, and do it wisely with sincerity, but also with intent, do over time have more successful return in careers than takers who may be much more fast at progressing in the early stages, but get caught up at some point. Because if you take from everyone, but don't give back, or even if you just match whatever you are given, it's ultimately not as rewarding personally and professionally than to give. And when I read this book, I felt very surprised because it theorized something that I had experienced without even wanting it at all. I spent the first 12 years of my career giving in a way, not looking for anything else than just leading sustainability and putting sustainability where it should belong and trying to make an impact without looking for my career or progression. And I progressed at the early stages of my career, probably slower than some who had a more ambitious career path and were able to climb up the ladders more quickly initially. And suddenly, over really the 12th year of my career, things came back like a boomerang without me expecting anything. I was invited to join boards, advisory meetings. I was hunted for my skills on the market constantly. I was asked to speak, intervene, teach. I was rewarded in so many different ways from people I had given to in the past that I had never even calculated anything, and who somehow thought about me or just gave the favor back in a way. And it circled around. And it's been now the past 10 years of my career have been incredibly surprising and gratifying in that sense, because suddenly all the seeds you planted, all the work, the hours, the thousands of hours, the commitment that you had when you try and do things with passion and hope for a result, it suddenly comes back, and it's quite exciting, to be honest. So I would encourage people to be patient and give, because you never know what comes back at you.
Yes, that is such a beautiful and inspiring story. And I feel like it also ties into regenerative, that's almost like a regenerative career. You're thinking about how can you provide value, how can you drive with passion, how can you connect with people without thinking about what you can extract, and then are rewarded with the bountiful fruits of your labor.
You're right. I would, however, say from my personal experience that the only reason that all this works is that it is matched with very hard data, financials, because some leaders, some organizations, and some situations require that hard, fact-driven type of decision making, and some others require the engagement. And being able to juggle with both, depending on the situations, and adapt a leadership style to a person or a context, that is what works. So for maybe some of the audience who will listen to this and think about their career in sustainability, I think it is still important to build a strong technical knowledge and work habit to build really the skills that will then allow you to take sustainability to the next stage. But you need that foundation, that ground to help, get your feedback on when needed.
Yeah, absolutely. And on the flip side of that, what kind of advice would you give to companies who are looking to build that culture of sustainability within their organizations and infuse the organization's DNA with that?
Be ready to reinvent your business. If sustainability is there only for regulatory or communication or image purposes, then there's little chance that it will transform the way you do your business, and you will keep doing the same but a bit cleaner. But if you are actually willing to be challenged, reinvent your entire product or service proposal under the lens of the value that it will bring, then that's where sustainability will become part of each of your core functions and value chain, all the way to your end customer or consumer, and make a difference. So I would say that sustainability is not a light commitment. It's a fundamental structural change in how to run a business or an organization. And on a side note, I would also suggest that there's more visible career path for sustainability leaders. There are for financial people, for marketing people. You can move from one stage to the other in your career. So much more difficult for sustainability, because it's a way of doing business, not so much a role. You can do sustainable marketing, you can do sustainable finance, you can do sustainable procurement, and more. But if companies recognize that extra set of skills, equations that can be brought to solve problems, then possibly can help reinvent their value proposal, their DNA, and create a more prosperous future for their business.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. That's really in line with everything that we've talked about today. So I'll take this as a good cue to wrap our conversation up. Thank you so much for your time, Timothy. Is there anything else you'd like to share with our audience before we wrap up?
Thank you, and a question. First of all, I want to thank you. It's been absolutely genuinely nice to get to meet you, Elena, and to speak with you. You initially approached me with a very organic conversation, and I was surprised and positively surprised. But I have a question for you. As part of my role, I very much wonder, what does the next generation expect? What do they expect from leaders in sustainability? What can they legitimately expect? And what kind of standard and example should we set for the next generation to deserve that sustainability role? You're part of a generation that brings so much more commitment, courage, audacity into their work, that I was curious to hear you on what do you expect from sustainability leaders in our world, and what would you want them to do, or what would you want to see from them?
That's a great question. I mean, I can't speak for my entire generation, but personally, what delights me and what I want to see more of is transparency and authenticity and creativity, some of the things we've talked about. So I think we're seeing all around industries that the way that we've been doing business, the way that we're structured, and the way that we're incentivized isn't working anymore, and is threatening our futures and our children's futures and our grandchildren's futures. So what I'm inspired by, and why I also really loved our conversation and the case study that you presented in Amsterdam, is because it showed exactly the shift in trying to change our system. Those changes might not happen overnight. We might not change our entire political system or transform the face of capitalism overnight. But even smaller but extremely impactful ways are giving me hope, and is what I strive to see. So instead of marketing and saying words, putting the actions behind it, showing that there's innovation happening in the how, those are the things that I want to see more, because I think this generation, especially with social media and TikTok and influencers and this focus on authenticity, we don't want to see just another marketing campaign. So
thank you for sharing this.
Yeah, thank you for asking the question and creating some space for this. So lovely to have you. Thank you for sharing about your personal story, the work that you do, and your philosophy. I hope this inspires other listeners to dig a little deeper into the way that we do things and get inspired to lead with passion and an intentional skill set.
Thank you, Elena, for this time and a very inspiring conversation. And if there are any questions, I'll be happy to stay connected to the ones who have comments.
Awesome. Thank you, Timothy.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Seeds of Hope. If you enjoyed the show, please follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcast, or your favorite platform so you never miss an episode. Share it with a friend who might find it inspiring. And if you're loving the podcast, we'd be grateful if you could leave a rating and review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. It really helps others discover us. See you next time, and thanks again.